Welcome to this episode of Scratch First, where we only deal with the making of a Nurgle Sorcerer in Terminator armor. This video is a bit longer than the previous ones, and it's after the fact, meaning the model is fully done, while on contrast to the previous videos, I went along with the process. Okay, here you can see a collection of bits and parts that I plan to use for this project. So I stacked some of the parts together to get a first idea of what all of this could look like. Ta-da! I know. In the end, this heap of bits would amount to this great looking miniature. Okay, let's see how I got this one done. After I cut everything apart, I did another preliminary sketch to check if things were adding up. Then I started with the legs and torso. First, I separated the hips and the legs. Since this is an older Terminator miniature, I wanted to bring it up to the size of the actual Terminator scale. Therefore, I split the legs underneath the hip armor, put in a spacer and glued them back together. The spacer is a small slice from a sprue. By that point I made the decision to cover up the exoskeleton on the Terminator's upper legs, as adapting them to the outcoming size with model putty would be a total nightmare. And this is how they looked afterwards. Part of the resizing was also adding a spacer in between the hips and the torso. Next, it was time to put some model putty on these legs. I use a 50-50 mixture of Milliput Standard and green stuff. To make it stick to the miniature, I drop a bit of super glue on the miniature. And to be extra precise, I use a toothpick to spread the glue. After I spread the model putty as evenly as possible, I formed the hard edge along the vertical axis of the upper legs, to give it a knight style kinda armor look. When the model putty was hardened, I used some sanding paper to sand the model putty down in order to get a clean look and a sharper edge. Then I realized that I should have taken off the chest plate design to have a better basis for further sculpting. So I went ahead and did it now. From another miniature, I cast off a chest design by using blue stuff. This bit I cut and sanded down until it was right and glued it to the sorcerer's chest. I followed this up by sculpting the base for the Terminator's hips. Before we progressed with the back, I wanted to give you guys a quick breakdown of the parts I used. The base of the canister is from an old Space Orc Looters. Its exhaust is also from the Looter series, being the cropped down muzzle of a shooter. Added to it we have some chains from the Chaos Vehicle sprue, holding a hook from a Warhammer Fantasy Chaos Barbarian banner. On this hook dangles a trophy head from a Horus Heresy Chaplain Consul. Of course, the canister had to be trimmed accordingly, which was probably the easiest part of it all. The canister fit perfectly, leaving one half of the vent shafts on the Terminator's back visible, as I do think they add a nice detail to the Terminator armor. Next came the head mounted onto the hook, so I got rid of the half spear on the head's bottom. After I took the hook from the banner, I tried to split it in a way that would make sense when I combine it together with the helmet. I glued it together and pinned it to the canister, before I grabbed my sculpting tool and started shaping the model putty to complete the hook and make an exit hole on the helmet's top. As my first attempt on pinning it to the canister felt a bit wrong position-wise, I simply drilled another hole, knowing that the first hole would be covered by the helmet. To finalize the whole thing, I placed the cropped shooter muzzle on top of the canister's top. Before that, I prepared it with a piece of wire, which I could use to wrap the model putty around to create that smoke. Also on the Terminator's back is this massive bell. The bell itself is from a kid's surprise egg toy I had stored in my bits box for ages and was super happy that I found it to use it now. So I drilled another hole, this time in the Terminator's top side. In it I placed a piece of wire on which I glued the hook to. Lastly, I added some model putty for more detail and texture. Since I had the model putty out already, I decided to get some more work done. Before I could do that, I needed to fix the miniature to a cork. One important part of Nurgle miniatures is always their chest plate. I shaped the putty to a hard edge along the vertical center of the chest. For the bell hanger, I decided to go with some Nurgle themed outgrowth. In the end, I added a trim to the shin armor. For this, I simply rolled a thin sausage of model putty, pressed it flat and cropped it on each side before attaching it to the shin. For extra goodiness, I imagined a loincloth. As I wanted to use as much of the bits as possible, I figured a good idea would be to use the skull trophies from the banner and let them dangle between the Terminator's legs. Nurgle and chaos-themed miniatures in general often feature chainmail parts. For this reason I got myself a shaping tool. With this tool I can create chainmail patterns. I'll get into that later in this video. So I made a piece of chainmail, glued it to the hips while it was still soft, and pressed the skull trophy onto it. I sculpted on another belly armor to give the Terminator a much more bloated look and to cover up the upper edge of the loincloth. Another much needed addition to this model is a cape. I relied heavily on blue stuff for creating this one. I made a mold from the cape of an old metal chaos general, put model putty in it and let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. Next I cut off the frizzy top of the model putty and glued it to the miniature. The arms themselves turned out to be quite easily done. I knew what I wanted them to look like. The highlight on the right arm came in form of a mold from a metal Terminator's glove design. The scythe proved to be a bit more of a challenge. The blade is from an old zombie miniature. To that I added chain blade bits. To complete the Nurgle style power skies, I needed to add a stripe of plastic profile. I did a bit of a touch up with a model putty and added some spikes to the plastic stripe. I found that board from an AOS Fanatic miniature as I was looking for something to put the scythe over the top. I simply cut away from it till it fit to the back of the scythe. Also missing from the model were tubes. So I got my tube tool, aka roll maker, out. I prepared a sausage of model putty and let it rest for about 20 minutes. That sausage I then placed on my tool, creating a tube. I trimmed it till it had the right size and super glued it to keep it in position. When you look at Nurgle miniatures, you usually find a tentacle or two on there. A great way to include them would be to make them hold the scythe. I wanted them to come out of the torso armor, so I cut some pieces away from the previous sculpting work and used some fresh model putty to set the upper edge for a hole. Again, I used my roll maker. This time though, I made long sausages with one pointy end, worked it over with my tool and voila! I simply glued them on while they were still soft and wrapped them around the scythe with a stick. Well, I'm sorry folks for the blurry footage, but I do think you guys can follow along. A Terminator wouldn't be a Terminator without shoulder pauldrons. I went back to my Orc collection and got a couple of shoulder protectors. One of those I upgraded with the cast of a squig's face and completed it with a leftover horn from some guy's helmet. Of course, it needed a little moddy putty magic. The right pauldron are simply two shoulder pads stacked on top of each other. To fill the gap underneath the armpits, I went back to my chainmail pattern tool. And here you can see the process. Make a blob of model putty and press it flat. Depending on how you want to use your patterned model putty, it's advisable to use something along the lines of cooking oil, so the model putty doesn't stick to your tool that much. I always try to keep it as wet as possible. And I would imagine that pure green stuff grants an easier time as well. I don't show it here, but it took me a couple of tries till I got the model putty off the tool. Let's focus on the making of the head. For the base, I used the cast of a Squig Hopper's helmet that I did prior. I cut everything off till I was left with two empty eye sockets. When doing some test placement, I realized that the arch of the Terminator's head would be in the way, so I took it off as carefully as possible to reuse it later. I added a tube that I had left over and stuck a Squig Hopper's weapon to the forehead. The touch-up with model putty was surprisingly easy. To give it the look of a gas mask, I cut off small sections of another leftover tube and glued them to the cheeks. finalize the whole thing, I had to place him on a base. I had one 40mm base lying around that I didn't know what to do with. It was this one. So I slapped some milliput silver grey on it. When the putty was still soft, I pressed the miniature on its pins onto the base. After the putty hardened, I glued the sorcerer onto place and sculpted his feet. So, there you have it. That's the whole process behind the miniature. I think it looks awesome. I'm really happy with it. Leave me a follow and a like if you enjoyed this video. So by now the miniature is fully painted and has seen its fair share of battlefield usage. I will show you the model in another video, but for now I'm signing off. See ya!